Like I said, we are picking up Lesson 7, page 6. We're just going to do a brief kind of review and then pick back up with the passages around chapter 14, chapter 15, and what was taking place. So, hopefully now, after our study of Mount Sinai, we have a good idea about the possible route of the, or is it route? Route? Yeah, I don't know. Route, either one. About the possible way that they came out of Egypt and to Mount Sinai and the different places in between that it says that they went. And so hopefully now, at least from a geography standpoint, we know. Do you have one for her? Okay. We know where. I think we have a good idea. We know which way they went. Now, I did read some other commentaries today about the stuff that's going to be occurring in Lesson 8. And 3 or 4 times he had to say, well, there's just no real evidence as to which way they went. Well, that's because I think this individual was locked into the traditional Mount Sinai. Well, I'm pretty convinced that there is evidence that they went through the Gulf of Aqaba and into Midian. I'm convinced of that from what I've seen through these documentaries. I think that's solid. So now that we have that understanding in mind, when we see these things, we can hopefully visualize some of these things that they found and make those connections. So at the top of page 6, at Pi Hahiroth, we see that God told his people to turn back from the direct course of Sinai and camp there. Now, the purpose of this unexpected directional change was to lure Pharaoh into thinking that they were lost and confused, hemmed in by the desert. By this move, God would harden Pharaoh's heart, create the occasion by which he would determine to make the effort to enslave the Israelites again. So we went through much of this, and we talked about the location where they were hemmed in. 2 possible places there on the Gulf of Aqaba that where 2 million people could have camped, where they would be hemmed in by the mountains and nowhere to go. So we see that the people, when they got to that point of view, or to that point, and then Pharaoh does show up, he does freely choose to come after them, that they are trapped by the Egyptian army and their chariots. And the people cry out to the Lord, and then they turn on Moses. And as they turn on Moses, they offer a bunch of I told you so's. And we shouldn't have done this, we should have stayed. And even Moses himself privately cried out in desperation. And eventually he makes a declaration to the people to basically hold your ground. Don't lose heart, don't lose your faith in what's about to happen. And God would protect them. And something very interesting occurred as they were encamped there and Pharaoh's armies on the way. Something happened that gave them brief protection. You guys remember what that was? Okay, the cloud. What about it? Yeah, it basically separated them. And what did it provide on either side of the cloud? Okay, light to whom? Darkness to whom? Yes. And so that's a pretty fascinating thing. And we determined this cloud, this pillar of fire that went before him, there's something very interesting, unique about it. What did we talk about? About the pillar of fire, the pillar of cloud. It did guide them. Okay, representing God's presence, but even more than that, was it a representation? No. Remember we said it was a Christophany? What did it say went between? Yes, it did represent God's presence, but I think even more than representing God's presence, it was. Because it says, the angel of the Lord went before them in the pillar of fire in the pot, right? So here we have what is possibly the pre-incarnate Christ that is going before them, which is pretty amazing to think about. So God commands Moses to lift up his staff before the waters. The waters separate. They walk through on dry land. And then the Egyptian army pursues them. And something interesting is said about this is that as the Egyptian army pursued them that God did something, waited for the morning. What would occur in the morning? And I don't know if we talked about this, that the morning was an important part of it here. Why wait till morning to do something? Yes. It's that God wanted them to be able to see what he was about to do. So in the morning watch, the Egyptians attempted to pursue the Israelites. We're now on page 7.8. The Egyptians attempted to pursue the Israelites through the sea. From the fire of the cloud, the Lord looked down upon this scene. He threw the Egyptian army into confusion, perhaps by means of a thunderstorm. Their chariot wheels began to swerve or jam up, as some ancient versions have it. The Egyptian commander realized he was fighting against Yahweh and ordered his men to retreat. At daybreak, when the Israelites could witness this miracle, God ordered Moses to stretch out his hand over the sea. When he did so, the waters rushed back together. Not one member of Pharaoh's army, which followed Israel into the sea, survived. The dead Egyptians, washing them out on the shore, reinforced faith in the power of God to save among the Israelites. The people feared Yahweh and put their trust in him and his servant Moses. So we have now the people that have crossed, we believe, crossing the Gulf of Aqaba, the Red Sea, on that side, and now they are, where are they now? Yeah, we believe they're in Midian on the coast. And that is basically where we're going to pick up as far as where they're at in their movements tonight. But here we have something in the scripture in chapter 15. Chapter 15 is a very interesting chapter. Chapter 15 it's praise. It's kind of a song almost. And in fact, it was. Then Moses and the sons of Israel sang, chapter 15, verse 1, this song to the Lord and said. So, we have here 19 verses, 18 verses of this song. And basically this song, if you just kind of glance through it, as many of their songs were, what was the purpose of these songs? Okay, it was praise. Okay. What was the content? Beth? Yeah, basically a recounting of historical events, right? Yeah. So it's praising God for praising him for what he has done by recounting his mighty works and what he has done. So it's an interesting thing to think about. It's basically it's offering praise, but what other good result comes from a song like this? Yeah, so hopefully they have a song like this, right? And it's something that would pass on from generation to generation and teach. So it talks about that, verse 3, the Lord is a warrior, the Lord is his name, Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has cast into the sea, and the choices of his officers are drowned in the sea. The deep covers them. So it's recounting this magnificent event in song that praises God, but it also teaches at the same time. and does some very, very interesting things as we do so. So in our lesson on page 8, this praise for deliverance, the decisive defeat of Pharaoh turned the sighing of 2:23. Remember when they were having what when we talk about the sighing of chapter 2 verse 23, what's it talking about? Chapter 2, Exodus 2 verse 23. Yeah, right? So they were oppressed in bondage for what they were doing, and there's groaning and those kind of things that occur. It turned that into singing. The Song of Moses is a litany of praise to the Lord. He is mentioned some 45 times in 18 verses. Now, what's interesting here are the different ways that God is referred to here. 11 times his personal name Yahweh is used, once in the shorthand for Yah in verse 2. Once he is called Adonai, Master, and 2 times El, Mighty One. Now, this term El, Mighty One, where do we, what's a really familiar, okay, El Shaddai, that means something else. But just El by itself is, yeah, Elohim, right? Where does that show up? Very predominant place. Very early place. Genesis. Yeah. And where it says, and God created Elohim. Now, Elohim's plural. Mighty ones. Well, why would that be there? Yeah. So here it's referred to as El, Mighty One. Now this song has 3 major divisions. In the first 5 verses, the singers refer to themselves in the first person and God in the third person. Here is a personal confession of faith. Yahweh is praised as a warrior who defeated his enemy. In verses 4 through 12, the song amplifies what happened at the sea. God is addressed in the second person in these verses. And to the end of the song, the destruction of Pharaoh's host is attributed to God's right hand, his power, and to his burning anger. The hymn celebrates God's incomparable nature, majestic in holiness, as well as his mighty acts. So that verse in verse 11, it says, who is like thee among the gods, O Lord? Why is that a significant verse? What all other gods? Yeah, what's the context here? Right? Where it's basically saying, how did your gods do for you, Egypt, during all this? That's so good, right? Who is like thee among the gods, O Lord? Who is like thee, majestic in holiness, awesome in praises, working wonders? Majestic in holiness. That is, we've talked about this many, many times, but it's always worth revisiting. And Eric, it was even discussing with me, because he's working through Denver Sizemore's book on basic doctrines with the youth, the teens, the next level students. And they're talking about God, the Father, and discussing his attributes. And where do you think they went and where they hung out immediately? Discussing God's attributes, God's love. And a few other things were mentioned. Guess what didn't get mentioned? And this happens for a lot of things. His holiness, God's holiness. And we discuss God's, when we talk about ultimate attributes of love and holiness, they must be equally ultimate. If we elevate one over the other or diminish one or the other, we're not in a good place. So we always need, when it says majestic in holiness, we need to make sure that we always remember and focus on, yes, God is loving, absolutely, but he's also ultimately holy. It's so important. Now, in verse 13, 18, the song dwells upon the implications of the Red Sea victory for the future. So what would be some of the implications for the future of what happened through the plagues and the Exodus through the Red Sea? What would be some of the implications, ramifications? Okay, so he has proven himself to the Israelites that I've brought you this far and I am holy and righteous and I will bring you home to the promised land. But what else? Yeah, so now there's no internet, right? There's no newspaper per se, but would word get around? Yes. And see here in these verses, it talks about the lands, the chiefs of Edom, the leaders of Moab, all the inhabitants of Canaan are dismayed and trembling grips them, and they have melted away. Terror and dread fall upon them. So these kind of things are going to be known about God's mighty hand and what he has done here, and it's going to affect the entire region. And in fact, it does. And in fact, these realities affect the next few years for them and what's about to happen. So, because of his unfailing love, Yahweh would lead his redeemed people to the place of his dwelling. Other nations of the area would hear of what transpired and would tremble. God would bring his people to the promised land where he would plant them and reign over them forever. Now this is interesting. Miriam, for the first time, was inspired by the Lord to exercise leadership. How did she express this? What happened? Yeah, she led them in what? Song and dancing, yeah. Verse 20, and Miriam, the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took the timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dancing. I didn't look this up, but I mean, if you guys got your Googlers or that you know, help me out here. What's a timbrel? It's a tambourine? It is? Are you asking? Or on my paper? What? Where? Oh yeah, rats. I'm not a fan of tambourines. What? No. Yeah, sure. You go right ahead. No, but she took a tambourine in her hand and began to sing back to the men the opening lines of their song. Now the other women went on after her and dancing chorus. Miriam was more than 90 at this time. So when you get there, Barbie, you can do that. All right. Now, Micah 6:14 names Miriam along with Moses and Aaron as one of the leaders in the Exodus. So that is the conclusion of lesson 7. And now we begin where we pick up in after this song of praise in chapter 15, verse 22, and at the beginning of lesson 8. Now, Israel's path to the promised land was not covered with rose petals. After crossing the Red Sea, the Israelites went into the wilderness of Shur. The area and the land they traveled was not an easy place to maintain in existence. Now, again, think about what we saw last week, or the last time we were together. It's been actually 3 weeks because we had New Year's and Christmas Eve in between. But think about what we saw and remember what they discussed about the condition of the land. Was it bustling with life? What did they say about it? But half inch every 10 years. Have any of you been in a desert atmosphere before? Like Arizona or somewhere, where there's desert. I know Molly has, some of the others. What is it? Can anybody describe what they've experienced for us, what it feels like? Okay, hot. Sandy and dry. Okay, so one time, years ago, out west, coming back from the Grand Canyon, it was in the middle of the night, and it was well over 100 degrees, pitch black dark, well over 100 degrees, and you just felt like it was the middle of the day hot, just from all this radiating dryness. It's just like dryness and heat, and you just wanted to drink constantly and stuff like so. It's not a place to maintain an easy place to maintain an existence. Now, even before they reached Mount Sinai, the redeemed of the Lord faced 5 serious problems. Now, this last lesson I think I gave you was 10 pieces of paper. This lesson tonight I gave you was 2 pieces of paper, 4 pages printed front and back. There'll be more coming. So we see here there's 5 serious problems in this lesson so far that you have. You have 2 of the 5. So next week you'll receive the next part of this lesson, which will be the 3rd, 4th, and 5th problems that they face, the continuation of lesson 8. So right now you've got half of lesson 8. So we begin tonight with the problem of water. Again, half inch of rain in 10 years. You're going to have to rely on what? I heard something. What'd you say? Yeah, you have to rely on God. Okay, 2 million people, but let's just say it's you over in that area. What are you going to have to rely on? Keep going. You got to find some water, right? You're going to have stuff with you. Supplies, right? And when that runs out, we got to find water. And so we know that in these arid environments, there can be, as Bugs Bunny has rightly shown us, an oasis in the desert. But there is such a thing as where there are springs, and those where the little pouches or pockets of where there is water. And so you would have to rely on that. And ultimately we know there's 2 million people traveling, that we know that there's no way they're going to do this without God. Were they able to bring large supply of water with them? No? Why? Yeah, right? Remember the night of the Passover? It was very sudden, very quick. They weren't able to bring much with them. They were able to bring some things, but not enough for a prolonged journey. So verse 22 of chapter 15, then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days into the wilderness and found no water. So 3 days, relying upon only what they had. And so we know there was a period of time between when they left and crossed, and we're going to have an idea of how long things are here shortly, about how long they've been gone. We'll see that. So they went 3 days and they found no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. Now, so they found what they believed was to be an oasis where you can imagine the excitement, right? And diving into the water immediately, you can imagine. And then it was completely bitter and undrinkable. Had to be kind of the roller coaster event, kind of really high of high and a really low of low. Now, do you remember what we saw in the video? That they did find something very nearby, about 3 days' journey. They found a place where there was bitter water. So the people grumbled at Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" Now, I just want to, again, we've tried to insert ourselves into this at different points in time, really trying to think about what this would be like. What do you think it would be like? You've been gone for a long period of time. You're carrying all your belongings. You're in this wilderness, desert area. Would this be a concern of yours? All right, now let's change this a little bit, right? Go ahead, Lynn. It's a country. There's a town with there's okay, think of it like New York, New York. New York's a state, but there's Madian, M-A-D. If you look on your maps, there's a place centralized like where Jethro, but the land of Midian was more, it's like a country, like a territory. So you can think of it like New York, New York. So yes, it is a specific locality within both called Midian. So the 3 days journey, no water. Now, think of this in the context of your family. Now, everybody here is at a different place chronologically. But what if you had someone that was very, very young with you, like a baby? How would you start to feel? Yeah, wouldn't you feel panicked? What if you had someone who was very, very elderly? I mean, this is your family. We need water. I mean, can you feel, you can start to feel a little bit of that anxiety, right? So what I'm getting at is here, I tend to empathize a little bit with the situation. And now put yourself in Moses' shoes. You're responsible for everybody. If you've ever led a trip somewhere and something's going wrong, you feel it. It weighs heavy. Even little things. But life or death? Can you picture the weight of all this that's on these people and the ones that are leading them through this? And it says, so the people grumbled at Moses, saying, what shall we drink? Then he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. And he threw it into the waters, and the waters became sweet. There he made for them a statute, not a statue, because two different things. He made for them a statute, God, and a regulation, and there he tested them. And he said, if you will give earnest heed to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have put on the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer. Verse 27, then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 date palms, and they camped there beside the waters. So, Moses was now the acknowledged leader, and after he had led the Israelites into the desert of Shur, the group traveled 3 days without finding water. There was a promising oasis which proved to be a disappointment. The water there was bitter, but no more than the people who expected to drink it. That spot was named Marah, which means bitter. The grumbling people turned their anger against Moses. They expected him to know all the water holes in Midian. Moses in turn cries out to the Lord. God directed his attention to a piece of wood, a tree, a piece of wood, which he was to throw into this brackish water. They say that what they most likely causes these springs to be bitter is that they're brackish. What's brackish? Okay, so like when you have, at least like brackish is kind of a mixture of fresh and salt water. It's not completely salt water, but it's not completely fresh water. It's brackish. So like when we travel to Florida and we go out to Melbourne, we go to the beach and we cross what's called it's an inland waterway. It's brackish water. It's a mixture of fresh and salt water, and so that's what they have there today. And some of these springs are brackish waters. They're very, very bitter. Can't drink them. Of course, if you've ever got a good mouth of salt water while you're swimming in the ocean, it actually will harm you more than help you. If you try to drink salt water, that's why That's why someone's strained it out. See, you can't drink it. It will actually harm you, but it doesn't taste good either. So, for 2 million people, at that point in time, I don't know what kind of practices they would have had to do so. Now, there's some interesting things that come up because we're going to talk about this in just a quick second. So God directed his attention to a piece of wood which he was to throw into this brackish water. The solution of the problem was near at hand, and I like how Doc Smith puts here, it often is. When God's involved, the solutions to many of our problems is near at hand many times. Now, why the piece of wood? Why the piece of wood? Now, some think this was a particular kind of wood that could make brackish water drinkable. A fellow by the name of George Rawlinson, the pulpit commentary in 1907, thinks it's probable that a tree or shrub in the vicinity had natural purifying power. The miracle would consist of pointing the tree out to Moses. So the miracle wasn't the wood itself making the water sweet because it was a natural thing, but Moses was made aware of it by God, and that he just used something natural to purify this water. What are your thoughts? That
Like it's been a big body of water, and for a tree to do it that quick, people were thirsty.
2 million.
3 days without water.
What's that?
It's a miracle.
Well, yeah, it's a miracle. I don't think there's anything to this that naturally purified it. I mean, and now, why would somebody go down that route to even try to think of something like that? To say, well, I'm going to do some study and find out how this could be possible this way. What would motivate them? Deny God's authority and power. Okay. Yes. Don't believe in miracles. Donnie? Okay, don't believe in miracles, denying God's power. All these things are absolutely correct. See, what was happening in the late 1800s, early 1900s is a thing called modernism. And modernism was seeking to interpret the Bible without the possibility of anything miraculous occurring. So we had to come up with naturalistic explanations for everything that's in there, or allegorical. And so there was a great movement that was fought back by men like BIB Warfield and others to say, no, this is God's word, and there are things that are probable and possible, like miracles. And there's no need to kind of come up with cockamamie stuff like a tree that could purify enough water for 2 million people. Exactly. And that is one of the points that Doc Smith brings out here. Documentation of the claim that modern Arabs make use of such a method of water purification is lacking. If this were possible and if it was true, then this was something that would be used today, right? If you have brackish water sources that are your only source of water in the desert, and this was true, then they would surely continue to use this practice today.
We have sassafras. You ever heard of
Sassafras? Sure.
Make it as a kid.
With brackish water? Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, now, so why the piece of wood? I believe it's this. Casting this object into the water was probably intended to be a symbolic action designed to convey to the grumbling crowds that something had been done about the water. So it's no different than if Moses had simply if God had said, use your staff, touch the water, make it sweet, make it drinkable. But in this case, it just happened to be in this manner. It's an expression of faith in Moses in obedience to do this, because later on we see something related to the water and it's different things occurred. He does it, the water's now drinkable, and this sweetened water must have been temporary, for the water in that region today is brackish. And I do want to refer you back to what we saw in the documentary. Now, God not only gave his people sweet water at Marah, but he also gave them something much sweeter, namely a promise. I like the way that is worded there. And here was that promise that's in the middle. It's kind of unusual that in the middle of this water episode that God says this. But he offers this promise in the middle of this episode for them. Obedience to the voice of God would guarantee them good health. None of the diseases which God had smitten Egypt would come upon Israel. Yahweh is a healer, and he would rather heal than inflict diseases as he did in Egypt. Now, this is interesting. At the end of verse 26, it says, "For I, the Lord, am your," what would normally go there? God, right? But here he says healer. "For I, the Lord, am your healer." This last phrase, "I, the Lord, am your healer," replaces the expected "your God" with "your healer," changing this kind of from a basic confession of Yahweh's special nature and relationship into a confession of special blessing upon those in right relationship with him. So this was a unique promise that was made to them in this time period. Is this something that we could convey and bring forward to you and I here today? Is this promise made to you and I? So, if it were made to you and I, if this was made to be brought forward to us, what could we then conclude? As long as what? If we are obedient, right? So is this have an ongoing effect? No, this is made to them. This is made to them. Very unique thing. What's something else? We're going to find out something else too. There was something else about their journey that occurred for them that doesn't occur for us, and I wish it did, because I just broke my belt loop. Yeah. I wish that applied to us. We wouldn't have to go shopping all the time. Remember the video? Yeah. Well, thanks to Amazon, I don't have to go much more anywhere. So, an interesting promise, a much sweeter thing in the middle of this. Well, as the Israelites pressed on in their pilgrimage, they found an abundance of water at Elim. This oasis was in a large plain that contained 12 springs and 70 palm trees. Now, I didn't dig into this, but the numerology here intrigues me. I just wonder if there's something to that. Anybody come across anything in your studies on that? It'd be something, a little side homework if you were interested in that. I just wonder. I mean, again, I don't think many times there's too many coincidences with God. Now, if this does have specific, if there is something to these numbers, then what does that tell us? Okay. God of order. I mean, there could be some stuff like that. I think one thing it tells us this. It's possible, but not likely. I'm pretty sure those palm trees were there when they got there, right? And probably the springs were there when they got there. When God created things and caused things and whatnot, as far as the way things were in His creation. And now, if it is something to the numerology here, that if God guided these things to be there in the creative act, that maybe they were there for a long, long time before they ever showed up, and it was prepared for them. You guys ever heard the song about the tree that was used to make the cross? It's kind of that idea that's running through my head here. That this place was prepared for them for when they got there. But it wasn't, I mean, is it possible that God could have made it come into existence as they approached? I don't think we have that indication here, do we? We have the kind of like this was a naturally existing place, but could God have caused this naturally existing place years and years and years before for this moment in time? You know, that's kind of where my mind goes. God's power and providence, I think, could be exalted in this. There's something to it. All right, then, homework, everybody. Look up and see what you can find on the 12 date palms and these, or the 12 springs and the 70 date palms. Now, again, my mind goes to the documentary. What'd they find? 12 springs in a place where there was multiple palm trees. They're pretty remarkable. Yeah. So, this oasis was in a large plain. It contained 12 springs and 70 palm trees. This detail is added by the eyewitness narrator, suggests that the journey to that spot, however difficult, was well worth it. Now, here's a devotional note that I think is really cool. Too many believers encamp permanently at Marah. Now, what is this from a devotional point of view saying? Yeah, don't let bitterness, disappointment. I mean, maybe for us as individuals, or maybe you've known somebody that cannot let go of a bitter disappointment. As a Christian, they cannot let go of a bitter disappointment. And when they cannot let go of a bitter disappointment, it's like they're camped there, right? It prevents them from what? Moving forward. Yes. And never press on in their pilgrimage to taste the refreshment which is waiting at Elim. See, if you think about it, possibly God has allowed us to go through these bitter disappointments, but if we press on our pilgrimage, there will be refreshment. Now, does that mean it's guaranteed here on earth? It doesn't mean it's guaranteed. Now, the refreshment is guaranteed in heaven. So it's going to be at the end of the road no matter what. It could be bitter disappointment after bitter disappointment after bitter disappointment. But if you stay locked in one, you will never have the opportunity for the refreshment that could be there. See what I'm saying? If you're locked into this state of affairs, then you'll never have the opportunity to move forward. There could be another bitter disappointment around the corner. But for the Christian at the end of the road, we know for a fact that even if our life is just one bitter disappointment after another, that we're still called to press on, and then eventually we will receive that refreshment, that refreshing, that reward that is heaven. See us through, but it doesn't automatically mean that there's going to be palm trees and fresh water. It's possible. The only way you're going to, it's possible that that's out in front, but you won't find it if you stay here. So that was the problem of water. The next problem was the problem of food. Now there's some stuff about this as I studied that I was wrong about. And then I had to correct some of my thinking. And I'm just wondering if I'm the only one. I want to see if there's anybody else that had this like I did. It's not anything major, but just little factual things. So, the contents of Exodus 16 can be divided into 4 paragraphs revolving around hunger and the provision of God. So the first thing we see in these first 3 verses, chapter 16, verses 1 through 3, is the pain of hunger. Anybody want to read that for me? Phil, go for it.
Then they set out from Edom, and all the congregation of the sons of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month after the departure from the land of Egypt. The whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The sons of Israel said to them, "Would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole sinful hunger.
I just try to imagine what it must have been like for Moses. From Elim, the Israelite host began to move eastward toward the desert of Sin, named after the moon god Sin. They had now been marching for 1 month. What little food they had brought from Egypt was now exhausted, and the group was too large to live off the land. For the third time within the month, the congregation began to grumble against Moses and Aaron. Their hunger caused them to idealize their sojourn in Egypt. Verse 3 exaggerates their plight. The good old days of slavery in Egypt were far superior to this. Their hunger had caused them to forget the slave masters and forced labor. Don't we do that, though? Don't we tend to exaggerate our current circumstances sometimes, or to exaggerate how bad things really are? I mean, sometimes we do. And in other ways, too, we look back at the good old days as somehow being always better. So, there's a need for water and they're hungry. God provided water. What's going to happen now? Well, the prediction of food, verses 4 through 12. Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether or not they will walk in my instruction. And it will come about on the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as what they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to all the sons of Israel, At evening you will know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your grumblings against the Lord. And what are we that you grumble against us? And Moses said, This will happen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and bread to the full in the morning, for the Lord hears your grumblings, which you will grumble against him. And what are we? Your grumblings are not against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, Say to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, Come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumblings. And it came about, as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the sons of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I have heard the grumblings the sons of Israel speak to them, saying, At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. So the Lord first communicated to Moses his solution to the hunger problem. He would rain down bread from heaven. The language clearly eliminates naturalistic explanations. Now, why would Doc Smith put this in here? Why would he say that this raining down from heaven would eliminate naturalistic explanations? Okay, why would he include this? Why would he have to say that the way that this is written rules out naturalistic explanations? We just talked about this. Yes, but why would he include this? Because there are people out there who try to explain this through naturalistic processes. They try. You're going to hear something here in a minute where they try. They try to explain this through natural existing things. The reason that Doc Smith has to include this is because there's a whole group of people trying to interpret this scripture, this passage, this whole thing without any possibility of miracles. Do you know the Bible that Thomas Jefferson used and had? I don't know if he wrote it himself or translated it or removed all the miracles. That mindset and that 1800s or on up to the early 1900s was very predominant. Modernism. So, that's why the language clearly eliminates naturalistic explanations. He puts that in here because people try to explain it that way. So the Lord gave precise instructions regarding the heaven-sent bread. The people were to gather day by day, only enough bread for that day, and on the sixth day they were to gather and prepare twice as much food. With these instructions, God would test the obedience of his people. So the bread that rains down from heaven, what do we call this? Manna, okay. Yeah, that's what it eventually got to be called, but from a theological perspective, what is this called, this bread from heaven? What is this? Heaven sent, theologically? Bread of life? Yeah. Poorly asked question on my part. It's a type. Okay? It's a representation of something that would be ultimately fulfilled in the New Testament. Keep going. No. Who says I am the bread of life? Jesus. This is a type of Jesus. Bread of heaven, bread of life, right? This is a type of Jesus. And it's carried forward, and this idea of bread and its relationship to Jesus. Anything in the New Testament church that carries that thought process through? Yeah. Which is connected to what? Which we just studied? The beginning of we're leaving town? Passover. Yeah. See how this all links together? Yep. That's what they end up calling it. All right, let's just go ahead. I'm just going to put this because what does anybody know what manna means? Who said that? It means what is it? The word manna literally means what is it?
Also, it just says he sent of the meat. So they mention quail later on.
Hang with me. Because you're right there. You're right there. It does say. Yep. We're going to get there in just a second. Yep. Great point. Because that's where I had some confusion. Where I was mistaken on that. So Moses and Aaron conveyed the announcement of God to all the people, for all had apparently been involved in the complaint. So to a man, a woman, child, everybody's complaining. We want to eat. They pointed out that the people's grumbling had not been against them, not been against Moses and Aaron, but against God. The grumblers would now realize anew that the Lord had brought them out of Egypt when they saw the glory of the Lord and experienced the provision of meat and bread on the next day. So Moses then directed Aaron to summon the people to an assembly before the Lord, i.e. a worship assembly. As Aaron addressed the assembly, the people observed the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud toward the desert. And that actually happens in verse 10. So, provision of food. That evening, in verse 13 through 18, so it came about at evening that the quails came up and covered the camp. And in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew evaporated, behold, on the surface of the wilderness there was a fine flake-like thing, fine as the frost on the ground. When the sons of Israel saw it, they said to one another, manna. They said, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, It is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it every man as much as he should eat. You shall take an omer apiece according to the number of persons each of you has in his tent. Okay? When they measured it with verse 17. And the sons of Israel did so, and some gathered much and some little. When they measured it with an omer, he who had gathered much had no excess, and he who had gathered little had no lack. Every man gathered as much as he should eat. And Moses said to them, let no man leave any of it until morning. But they did not listen to Moses, and some left part of it until morning, and it bred worms and became foul, and Moses was angry with them. And they gathered it morning by morning, every man as much as he should eat. But when the sun grew hot, it would melt. So that evening, the quail came and covered the camp. Psalm 78:27 says, when he rained meat upon them like the dust, every winged fowl, the sand of the sea. So it's definitely a bird, right? Are quail winged fowl? Yes. Now, here's the question I have for you. How many times did they eat quail in their 40 years? A lot? Got sick of it? Two times. Now, see, I was under the impression that they got manna and quail every day. Two times. Who else has heard it was every day? Someone look up Numbers 11:31. $11:31. No worries. 11:31. Got it? Go, Cal.
Now there went forth a wind from the Lord, and it brought quail from the sea, and let them fall beside the camp about a day's journey on this side and a day's journey on the other side, all around the camp, and about 2 cubits deep on the surface of the ground.
Okay. This is the only two times that we have specific references that they had quail. Now, what does it say in verse 35 of chapter 16 that we're reading? Someone read it.
When the sons of Israel ate the manna 40 years, until they came to an inhabited land, they ate the manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan.
What's missing? Who's struggling with this? I see some faces. Do we have indication here that it was quail every day? Anybody have anything biblical that they can offer me? I'm saying that there was quail every day. Yes. Now, could they have preserved it? Kept a bunch of it and preserved it, and it lasted for a while. Certainly. Quail jerky. I saw Steve's like, you bet you can. Grind it up, put it in my little dryer thingy. What do you call it? Jerky maker, dehydrator. You can make some quail jerky. It says they had manna for 40 years. It does not say they had quail. And why would it make reference to there being quail if they were getting quail every day anyway? In Numbers. What are your thoughts? I see some squirming. Uh-huh. Yeah, tastes like honey. Yep.
Eat that for 40 years, though.
Okay, now let me get to a stopping point here. Let's finish this provision of food. So in the morning, the Israelites awoke to find a layer of dew around the camp when the dew dried. When the dew dried, that sounds like a song, when the dew dried. Okay, then they noticed thin flakes like frost on the ground. Moses told them it was the bread of the Lord. Now, I told you about these naturalistic theories, right? Listen to these. About what this was from a non-miraculous point of view. Two theories have been advanced to try to explain the manna rationalistically. The so-called tamarisk manna is a secretion of two kinds of insects on tamarisk trees. The drops range from the size of a needle head to that of a pea. The sun causes the substance to drop from the trees. During the night it hardens. The worms were really ants which carried off the grains in the morning when the ground temperature reached 70 degrees around 8:30 a.m. The secretion droppings are gathered by natives of the region during June and July. Josephus must have been alluding to the substance when he affirmed this in his day. The manna still fell on the Sinai Peninsula. The second theory advanced by the rationalist traces the manna to a certain lichen. You guys know back from old biology class, what lichen is? Yeah, it's a symbiotic thing of, I think, moss and fungus, right? And it looks white and flaky. So, pea-sized globules blown by the wind could have been scattered about the camp of Israel. Older writers describe how the natives gathered and ate these sweet-tasting nuggets. So the next time you're out and about, you see some lichen, get you a bite. The use of this substance has not been attested in the last century and a half. So what do you think about the rationalistic, naturalistic explanations? Pretty solid? Enough to feed 2 million people for 40 years as they wandered? It's ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. Every day. Ludicrous. So Moses directed the people to gather as much of the bread of the Lord as they needed. He suggested an omer, about 2 quarts for each person living in a tent. Gathering the manna by hand, the people had to estimate how much they had accumulated. Some had more, some had less, but a miracle occurred when they measured their gatherings by the omer standard. Each person had exactly what he needed. Now, here's the question. Was the manna all they ate for 40 years? Is that all they ate? They took flocks with them. Well, what would that provide them? Meat and milk. So the flocks probably would have reproduced as they went, right? Could they have used them as meat and milk? Certainly. But their main source of sustenance was definitely the manna. Now, in Deuteronomy 2:6, there's an attempt to buy food from the Edomites. So it is reasonable to assume as they traveled, they may have bartered, they may have tried to purchase different things that they ate at different places, and also lived off if they came to a date palm, they probably were eating dates, right? Now, not all 2 million, but maybe some of them at some points. Yeah. 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 Are you saying they were cannibalistic? What's wrong there? Okay, so we will pick up at precepts for the food next week, and then we'll get into the next 3 problems that are going to occur as they move forward in their wanderings. So, I saw some see if you can do any further findings about the idea of quail. Was it daily or was it 2 times? See what you can find. See what you can find. Where we left off there, it's the top of page 3, 4. Yeah, precepts for the food, top of page 4. Yeah, precept, that's where we're going to pick up next week. Yep, top of page 4. Any questions or comments? Go ahead.
I always thought that as they were leaving Egypt, the people dumped on them
They did?
and stuff, and here, take it, get out of our town, don't come back.
Yes, that does, that,
Here's your food, here's your water, and
Sure.
don't come back here for nothing.
yes.
And so, and I always assumed, and I've learned differently, that it was a 3-day trip from there to the ocean front.
To the crossing?
And then they'd run out of food and water. There they were. That's not how it happened. So I assume
Well,
that
the dating,
they rationed their food, but they couldn't ration the water, so.
well, the dating of what we have here, that we don't know, we know that from what it was told to us here, that 1 month had passed by the time they got to Mara. That's what the scripture says. Now, during that 1 month period, exactly when did they cross the Red Sea? You know, cross where we believe the Gulf of Aqaba. I mean, it's somewhere close to that time period at the end there. We don't know how long it took, but they had a month to get from that point to that point, from when they left. The first actual biblical dating that we have a month period of time. And so 2 million people in a month could consume a lot, right? They could consume a lot of food and water in a month's period of time. You guys have kids. Well, a lot of you have kids, grandkids, right? Would your fridge last a month? No. Yeah, and travel with it. Yeah, so they had to have some sort of providence to be able to make this journey, which should have been a few weeks, not 40 years. They didn't know it was going to be 40 years. Okay, any other questions, comments? Alrighty, go ahead.
It wasn't originally supposed to be 40 years, was it?
No.
I mean, that came along because of all the.
Because of their sin. Yep. I mean, they didn't. We'll find out exactly how long it took them to get to the promised land where they sent the spies in. And then at that point, things went south. Right? So we'll find that out here as we go. But it definitely was not a 40-year journey. It could have been a few weeks. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but we'll get an exact number of what it should have taken them to travel. But it was weeks and months, not years, not 40 years. That was because of their punishment. Okay, any other questions? Comments? All righty.